Hey everybody. So, got a question yesterday from Barry. Barry writes, given the events in Ukraine, do you think that maybe you gave up on the peak oil narrative too soon? All right, so in the unlikely event that you don't know, I spent a very long time interviewing people about something called peak oil, which is the idea that eventually the production of petroleum will reach a peak and then begin to fall off, and that when that fall off begins, there's all manner of unpleasant knock-on effects that the global society will have to either adapt to or get wrecked by. So I'm no longer into that narrative. Just to put it mildly, we'll say that. Barry says, given the events in Ukraine, do you think that maybe you gave up on the peak oil narrative too soon? Well, that depends. Is peak oil a conspiracy theory? There are certain people who don't want to be considered conspiracy theorists who take peak oil seriously who would say absolutely not. No, I mean, it's just geology and physics. There is X amount of, potentially recoverable reserves, and eventually we will have consumed 0.5x, half of it will be gone. And thereafter, production will fall off. Or, if we do manage to, through technological innovation, to keep production high, even though we've used more than half, then eventually when the production peak comes, the fall off is going to be a lot more rapid and steep than the ramp up. But in any event, it's not a conspiracy theory, it's just physics. Physics and chemistry and geology, and there's no conspiracy theory to it. But the peak oil community, the actual people who are interested in that notion and who would gather in places like, the ASPO conference, there's a lot of conspiracy theorists and a lot of conspiracy types who gravitated to this narrative. And, the aspect of the peak oil narrative, which is undeniably a conspiracy theory, is the part that says, yeah, the government knows all this and they're not telling you. They're withholding what they know about how soon petroleum is going to run out, and they're keeping a lid on it, and they're using their power for manufacturing consent and the manipulation of public opinion in order to keep people blinded to the fact that our glorious, easy lifestyle of carbon energy or fossilized sunlight is coming to an unceremonious and unpleasant end in the near future. The government knows it, they're keeping it from you. That's a conspiracy theory. That is absolutely 100% textbook fucking conspiracy theory. And you can't get very far talking about peak oil with anybody without getting into those waters. So in that respect, yes, peak oil is a conspiracy theory. Now, what does this have to do with Barry's question? The non-conspiracy theory version of peak oil, it's just physics, chemistry, and geology. There's no recourse necessary to hidden cabals or, public relations machinations or anything like that. If that's your peak oil, well, the Ukraine situation has nothing to do with that. Nothing. Yeah, we have sudden price spikes in oil. We have a sudden supply squeeze because the United States, and more importantly Europe, has decided that they're not going to let Vladimir Putin sell oil or natural gas. Now, they can't stop him from selling oil and natural gas. All they can do is not buy it from him. Or they can shut down his access to dollars. They can shut down his access to traditional methods of moving money around. But that's like trying to censor people on the internet. It used to be said that the internet treats censorship as damage and routes around it. The social media companies, and Google in particular, have gone a long way to fixing that aspect, that non-censorable aspect of the internet. It is very censorable now. You might be able to go to Rumble or you might be able to go to Odyssey, but really if you get kicked off of YouTube, you're pretty much screwed financially if you're doing this for money. Or if you're doing it like me to get comments from people. Because I'll spend a lot of time putting together a podcast, I'll put it up and it gets 0 comments or it gets 1 comment. And I'll spend 1 hour at most, making a 20-minute video that might get 10, 15, 20 comments. And, for me, that's the candy. That's the reinforcement. But the events in Ukraine and the fact that various parts of the Western alliance and the global community have decided to try to punish Russia by prohibiting them or inhibiting their ability to sell or generate income from hydrocarbon energy, that has nothing to do with peak oil. That's not just the natural geological limits to this free energy bonanza. That's definitely manufactured. But if you willingly embrace all of the conspiracy elements with peak oil as well, to say that yes, the powers that be want us to live in poverty, they want us to accept dysfunctional organizations, they want us to become just accustomed to the idea that we live in a decadent society that's on the downhill slope, and peak oil is the notion of peak oil and the fact that so much is dependent on hydrocarbon energy, for the continuation of our functional society. If you just embrace all the conspiracy aspects as well, then you can say, yeah, this Western Europe and the United States, but really it seems like Europe is leading the charge on the the financial punishments. If you see that not as the public pronouncements around it, this is an attempt to defend the people of Ukraine and punish Russia for its naked aggression, blah blah blah. If you see this move, to kick Russia out of basically the infrastructure and the business of global commerce, particularly with regard to hydrocarbon energy, if you see that not as an attempt to protect Ukraine or to punish Putin, but as an attempt to, as an assault on the global economy with the aim of impoverishing people and, pitting people against one another who otherwise would have found common cause. I mean, if you see all of that as of a piece with peak oil, then yeah, I mean, this still kind of fits, but it was really... I tried to take my peak oil with as little conspiracy theory as possible. And, the people that I was talking to at the time, for the most part, were of a like mind. Now, you can certainly go through the list of C-Realm podcast guests and find the obvious conspiracy theorists, and some of them would embrace the label. Mark Rabinowitz, for example, of oilempire.us. I would call him a conspiracy theorist, and I think that he would be hard-pressed to deny it, really. But, this is back in the day when James Howard Kunstler asserted repeatedly and often that he was allergic to conspiracy theories, that he had no interest in conspiracy theories, but he was deeply interested in the peak oil narrative. These days, I think maybe he has a different position on conspiracy theories. And, I did a video on conspiracy theories several years ago. I'll link to it. But in short, there are conspiracies. People do conspire. But there's also a lot of emergent behavior that gives the appearance of a conspiracy, but really doesn't require one. Just people looking after their own class interest is going to give rise to emergent behavior, which is going to give the appearance of a lot of collusion, when in fact very little collusion is required. Beyond that, I think the more time a conspiracy encompasses, like, I don't think conspiracies play out over hundreds of years. I think when the conspirators are all dead, the conspiracy is dead. Now, I mean, you could make the case that, well, why didn't the U.S. government collapse when the founding fathers died? They had instituted procedures and institutions which could outlive the founding members, and couldn't you do the same thing with a conspiracy? Well, I suppose you could, but it's kind of hard to do without explicit publicly available documents, which is what governments are built on. It's possible, but I think the more seemingly random data points one draws in crafting their conspiracy narrative, and the more time and the more players they pull into their grand conspiracy narratives, the more they have entered into the realm of just sort of kooky psycho, pharmacological or, auto-pharmacological neural manipulation. Basically, they're just getting high off of this activity of finding seemingly improbable connections between far-flung data points. You know, that just gives people a good feeling. It's like solving a crossword puzzle. Makes you feel, you know, like things are falling into place. And they are, you know, but they're falling into place inside of a mental construct which is increasingly divorced from reality. You know, the more your grand conspiracy theory encompasses, the more likely it is to be just an exercise in self-doping, you know, neurological self-doping. All right. That's all.